The city was called Guanju, but the name felt like a ghost on the wind. The buildings were broken teeth against a dirty orange sky. The sounds were gone. The sounds of cars, of people talking, of life. All of it was gone. Now there was only the deep, shaking hum of the great ships that filled the sky, and there was the silence of the people left behind. Jean walked in a line with the others. His clothes were dusty and torn. His throat was dry with thirst. Heavy metal cuffs glowed with a soft blue light around his wrists, pulling his arms together. He did not struggle. He kept his head down, but his eyes were busy. He watched everything. The creatures who had taken them were called the Kthar. They were tall, much taller than a man. Their bodies were covered in a hard, dark shell that looked like polished stone. They had 4 arms, and their faces had large, dark eyes that seemed to be made of 100 smaller pieces. They did not speak with words Jean could understand, only with clicks and deep rumbles. But the small devices on their chests turned those sounds into harsh, guttural Korean. Move, a Kthar guard would say, and the line would shuffle forward. They were being led up a wide ramp into the belly of the largest ship. The air inside was cold and smelled strange, like metal and something sharp and clean. The light was a pale, unfriendly blue. Jean felt the floor vibrate under his feet. This was a machine, a world of its own, and it was alive with a power he could not understand. The line moved into a vast room. It was so big he could not see the ceiling, just darkness above the blue lights. In the center of the room was a raised platform made of a black, glassy stone, and on that platform, sitting on a massive throne of the same material, was their king. Jean knew he was the king because he was bigger than all the others. His shell was a darker, richer black, and lines of bright orange light pulsed across it in complex patterns. He sat perfectly still, his multifaceted eyes watching the line of humans with no expression Jean could read. This was King Vexus. One by one, the humans were shoved forward in front of the king. A Kthar with a data slate would speak. This one was a structural engineer, skilled. Mark for indenture in the orbital yards. The man was pulled to one side, his face pale with fear. Another was pushed forward. This one's profile shows high physical strength, no technical skills. Mark for manual labor on Kthar Prime. The process was cold and quick. It was like sorting tools, useful or not useful. Jean watched, and a cold knot tightened in his stomach. He had been a mechanic. He fixed things. Old ground cars, broken generators, faulty datapads. He was good with his hands and good at understanding how things worked. But he was not on any official list. He was just a man who fixed things for his neighbors. To the Kthar, with their slates and their scans, he was nothing. He saw a woman who had been a teacher. The slate declared her unexceptional. She was marked for labor. He saw a man who had been a farmer. Also unexceptional. The same fate. Then his eyes moved away from the king. Behind the throne, there was a large cage made of shimmering energy beams. It was filled with people. The ones who had been passed over. The ones deemed only good for their muscles or worse. Their faces were masks of despair. Most of them were hunched over, crying softly or just staring into nothing. But one was not. She was a young woman, maybe a few years younger than him. Her clothes were as dirty as everyone else's, and her dark hair was messy. But she was sitting up straight. Her head was tilted, and her dark, intelligent eyes were not blank with fear. They were watching. She was looking at the Kthar guards, seeing how they moved, how they held their weapons. Her gaze flicked to the control panels on the walls, watching the lights change. She was learning. She was remembering. Jean did not know her name, but he saw something in her that was different. In this place of defeat, she was still fighting, just by paying attention. The line moved forward. Soon it was his turn. A heavy hand shoved him from behind, and he stumbled, falling to his knees on the cold floor before the black dais. The glow from the king's shell was warm on his face. He could feel the power coming from the being in front of him. He looked up. King Vexus leaned forward slightly. The hundreds of pieces of his eyes seemed to focus on Jean all at once. The silence stretched. The only sound was the hum of the ship. The Kthar with the data slate scanned Jean and made a dismissive click. Biometrics are baseline. No notable skills in the database. No higher education markers. The records are blank. He is unexceptional. The Kthar looked at the king. Assign him to the magma cores of Kthar Prime. Jin's blood ran cold. He didn't know what the magma cores were, but the name alone sounded like death. It was a sentence. A short, brutal one. This was it. He had to do something. He could not just go quietly. He took a slow breath, forcing the fear down. He looked directly at the king, not with anger, but with a calm he did not feel. Great king, Jean said. His voice was rough but clear in the silent room. A ripple of movement went through the Kthar guards. One of them raised a weapon, a low growl coming from its chest. King Vexus lifted one of his 4 hands, a small gesture that made the guard freeze. The king's head tilted. The animal speaks, the translator said, the voice flat and devoid of any real curiosity. You have a final plea? The magma cores await. Your scanners, Jean said, keeping his voice even. They look for skills you already know about. They do not look for new things, for opportunities you have not seen. King Vexus was still for a moment, then let out a sharp, rattling sound that might have been a laugh. Opportunity? You think a creature from a broken world has something to offer the Cthar Empire? I am a man who sees how things work, Jean replied. He gestured with his head, unable to point with his cuffed hands. On the way up into the ship, I felt it. I heard it. There is a problem in your secondary plasma conduit. A vibration. A wrong sound. A different Cthar, one with more orange on his shell, stepped forward. This was Commander Droth. This is a lie, he snapped, his translated voice sharp. Our systems are perfect. Our engineers are the finest in the galaxy. This human seeks only to delay his fate. Jean looked away from the king and met Commander Droth's gaze. He knew this was the most dangerous moment. If they did not check, he was dead. The vibration is at a specific frequency, 12.3 terahertz. It is small now, but it will grow. In 3 cycles, it will make your primary thrusters fail. You will be dead in space. He paused. Check your lower engineering bay. The junction marked 7. The throne room was utterly silent. King Vexus looked from Jean to Commander Droth. The king's expression was unreadable, but he gave a slow, deliberate nod. Commander Droth clicked an order to a smaller Cthar, who scurried away. The wait felt like an eternity. Jean remained on his knees, the cold of the floor seeping through his pants. He could feel the eyes of all the Cthar on him. He could feel the eyes of the humans in the cage, especially the watching girl. He did not look at her. He kept his focus on the king. The smaller Cthar returned. It communicated with Commander Droth not with words, but with a series of rapid clicks and gestures. Droth's posture changed. He stiffened. He turned back to King Vexus and gave a single, reluctant nod. King Vexus made that laughing sound again, louder this time. A human, primitive. He sees a flaw that our own instruments missed. He leaned back on his throne, the orange lights on his shell glowing brighter. This is amusing. Very well. For saving my ship this inconvenience, you will be rewarded. We are not without honor. One of the guards walked forward carrying a heavy metal chest. He opened it with a click. Inside, stacked in neat rows, were bars of a shining, pale yellow metal. They glowed with a soft, inner light. It was beautiful. It was wealth beyond anything Jean had ever imagined. Gold from the core of a dead star, King Vexus said. Wealth that could buy a city on your little world. Take it. It is yours. The guard placed the open chest on the floor in front of Jean. The light from the gold bars lit up his face. He looked at it. He looked at the fortune that could have been his. He thought of what it could have meant in the old world. Safety, comfort, a life of ease. Then, slowly he lifted his head. He ignored the chest. He raised his hand, his finger pointing away from the gold, past the king, past the guards. He pointed straight into the energy cage, at the girl with the watchful eyes. All the breath seemed to leave the room. Not the gold, Jean said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. I want her. I want Myri. He did not know her name until he said it. But in that moment, it felt like the only name that mattered. The silence in the throne room was absolute. It was a heavy, thick thing, broken only by the deep, constant hum of the ship's engines. The sound seemed to grow louder, filling the space where words should have been. Every Cthar guard, every court official, every single human in the energy cage stared at Jean. The glow from the star gold bars at his knees painted his face in a warm, heavenly light, but he was not looking at it. His outstretched arm and pointing finger were as steady as stone. King Vexus, who had been leaning back in amused satisfaction, slowly straightened up. The orange lights on his carapace flickered, a sign of confusion or surprise. His multifaceted eyes shifted from the gold, to Jin's face, to the end of Jin's finger, and then followed its line across the room to the energy cage. He saw the girl. Myri. She was standing now, her back pressed against the shimmering energy bars. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a stunned disbelief. Her gaze was locked on Jean, trying to understand the man who had just traded a king's ransom for a stranger. You! King Vexus's translated voice was a low, dangerous rumble, losing its earlier amusement. You spurn the wealth of an empire? You look upon the treasure of a star's heart and you say, no. He leaned forward, his large frame casting a shadow over Jean. For a single, unremarkable female? Her biometrics are baseline. Her records are null. She is worthless. The word worthless hung in the air. Jean slowly lowered his hand, but he did not break eye contact with the king. He knew he was walking on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sign of weakness, and the king's amusement would turn to wrath. That is my choice, Jean said, his voice quieter now, but still clear. He did not explain. He did not justify. He simply stated it as a fact. From the side, Commander Droth took a sharp step forward. His shell plates rattled with agitation. Sire, this is a deviation from all known patterns. This is not the irrationality of a simple beast. He sees value where we have confirmed there is none. This is a dangerous, unpredictable trait. We should reconsider this reward. The king's head swiveled to look at his commander. The orange lights on his shell pulsed brightly for a moment. Jean could feel the tension between the two aliens. The king saw a fascinating puzzle. The commander saw a threat. But a king's pride is a powerful thing. Vexus had offered a reward. To take it back because he did not understand the choice would be a sign of weakness. His amusement, though now mixed with irritation, won out. He let out a sharp, dismissive click. A king's word is bond, Commander. If the human wishes to crown his foolishness with this final, stupid act, we shall let him. He waved a clawed hand toward the cage. Let it be a lesson to all who watch. This is the nature of humanity. They are driven by sentiment, not sense. It is why they lost their world. He looked back at Jean, his voice dripping with contempt. Grant him his prize. A guard moved to the energy cage. With a low buzz, a section of the shimmering bars disappeared. The guard reached in, his large hand closing around Myri's thin arm. She did not cry out. She did not struggle. She let herself be pulled from the cage and pushed forward across the wide floor. Her walk towards the throne felt very long. All eyes were on her. She kept her head up, her eyes now fixed on the floor in front of Jin's knees. She stopped a few feet from him, standing beside the open chest of glowing gold. The contrast was stark and strange. The incredible treasure and the dirty, worthless girl. The guard who had brought her removed the energy cuffs from her wrists with a device on his belt. The blue light around her hands vanished. She flexed her fingers slightly but gave no other sign of relief. Take your reward and go, King Vexus said, his voice bored now. Their stench of illogic is beginning to offend me. He gestured, and two regular guards moved to flank Jean and Myri. Their job was clearly to escort them away. Out of the royal sight point, one of the guards kicked the chest of gold shut with a loud, final clang. He picked it up easily, holding it as if it were nothing. The other guard shoved Jean, not hard, but enough to make him stumble forward. Move, the guard growled. Jean got to his feet. His legs were stiff from kneeling. He glanced at Myri. Her face was a careful, neutral mask. She fell into step beside him as the guards led them away from the throne, across the vast room, and through a different, smaller archway. They were marched down a series of cold, blue-lit corridors. The grandeur of the throne room was gone, replaced by the stark, functional reality of the ship. The walls were bare metal, with pipes and conduits running along the ceilings. The air smelled more strongly of ozone and something faintly acidic. They did not speak. The guards behind them were silent except for the heavy clomp of their feet. Finally, they stopped at a heavy door that slid open with a hiss. The room inside was small and dark. The guard with the chest tossed it inside, where it landed with a heavy thud on the floor. The other guard pointed into the darkness. In, he said. Jean and Myri stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind them, plunging them into near-total darkness. A moment later, a single, dim light strip on the ceiling flickered on, revealing a small, square room with bare metal walls. There was no furniture, no window, nothing except the chest of gold sitting in the middle of the floor. It was a cell. For a long moment, they just stood there, listening to the fading footsteps of the guards. The only sound was the ever-present hum of the ship. Myri was the first to move. She turned to face Jean, her arms crossed over her chest. Her neutral mask was gone. Now her eyes were sharp, questioning, and wary. Why? She asked. Her voice was low and steady. Why did you do that? Jean walked over to the wall and slid down it to sit on the floor. He was tired. The adrenaline of the last hour was fading, leaving him drained. He looked at the chest of gold, then back at her. They were going to send me to the magma cores, he said simply. That is a death sentence. I saw a way to live. I took it. But the gold, she said, gesturing to the chest. You could have had the gold and a chance to buy your way into a better life somewhere. Why ask for me? You don't know me. Jean looked at her, really looked at her. In the dim light, he could see the intelligence in her eyes, the same sharp awareness he had seen from across the throne room. I saw you in the cage, he said. Everyone else was broken. You were not. You were watching. You were counting the steps of the guard patrols. I saw you. And when the Kthar technician walked past the central console, you watched his fingers. You memorized the access code he typed in. Myri's eyes widened slightly. She uncrossed her arms, a slow, deliberate movement. She had not known anyone was watching her that closely. The Kthar, Jean continued. They only see what is written on their slates. They look for a title. Engineer. Scientist. They do not look at the person. They thought I was unexceptional because I was not on a list. They think you are worthless because your data is blank. He nodded toward her. But you are not worthless. You see things. You remember things. That is a skill they cannot scan for. That is a skill we need. He let the words hang in the air. He was not asking for trust. He was stating a fact. They were in a fight for their lives, and he had just chosen a partner he believed could fight smart, not just hard. Myri was silent for a long time, processing his words. She looked at the man sitting on the floor. He was not a warrior. He was not a leader. He was a mechanic. But he had seen the truth of her when no one else had. He had traded a fortune for a tool he believed was more valuable. It was a cold, practical choice, and in its own way, it was a greater sign of respect than any declaration of chivalry. A very small, almost invisible smile touched her lips. It was gone in a second. The code was 7 digits, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Alphanumeric. It began with K4. Jean nodded slowly. Good. He leaned his head back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes. He had no plan yet. He had no idea what would happen to them next. But he was not alone in the dark anymore. He had chosen well. And for now, in the belly of the alien ship, with a fortune in gold they could not eat and a future that was a terrifying mystery, that small fact felt like a victory. The door to their cell hissed open without warning. Bright light flooded the small room, making both Jean and Myri flinch. A Kthar guard stood silhouetted in the doorway, his large form blocking the corridor. Out, the guard commanded, his translated voice flat. Jean and Myri got to their feet. Jin's body was stiff from the cold metal floor. He glanced at the chest of gold, still sitting untouched in the center of the room. It was a strange, glowing monument to the choice he had made. The guard did not even look at it. They were marched back into the maze of corridors. The ship was immense. They walked for a long time, passing through areas that buzzed with activity. Kthar engineers working on open panels filled with glowing wires, storage bays stacked with strange equipment, and other areas that were silent and empty. Finally, they entered a part of the ship that was less clean. The air here was warmer and carried a faint, unpleasant smell of old food and machinery. The walls were scuffed and stained. They passed open doorways where they could see other humans. These people were not in cages. They were working. They wore simple, gray uniforms and were scrubbing floors, polishing metal surfaces, or carrying heavy-looking containers. Their eyes were downcast, their movements slow with tiredness. These were the laborers. The guard stopped at a closet. He opened it and pulled out 2 sets of the gray uniforms. He threw them at Jean and Myri. Put these on, he said. You will work here. You will clean. You will do as you are told. If you cause trouble, you will be sent to the magma cores. Do you understand? Jean and Myri nodded. The guard pointed to a small, open alcove with a sonic shower and a waste reclaimer. You can change there. Be quick. They changed into the stiff, scratchy uniforms. When they came out, the guard was waiting. He handed each of them a bucket, a brush, and a cloth. Start here, the guard said, pointing to a long, dirty corridor. Clean everything. Floors, walls, pipes. Everything must be clean by the next cycle. He then turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing until he turned a corner and was gone. They were alone. Or as alone as they could be on a ship full of aliens and captive humans. For a few minutes, they did nothing but look around. The corridor was long and straight. A few other human cleaners worked far down at the other end, not looking up. Conduits and pipes ran along the ceiling and walls. Some of them were warm to the touch. The place was a mess of grime and dried, unidentifiable stains. Jean picked up his brush. We should look like we are working, he said quietly. Myri picked up her own bucket. Yes, they started scrubbing the floor. The work was hard and boring. The cleaning solution in the buckets smelled sharp and did not lather. They had to scrub the same spot over and over to make any difference. But as they worked, they began to talk in low voices, their heads close together. The Kthar are very proud, Jean murmured, scrubbing at a black stain on the floor. They think their technology is perfect. They do not check things they think are beneath them. Myri nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. They are also predictable. The guard patrols. They walk the same routes at the same times. They look straight ahead. They do not look at the cleaners. We are like part of the wall to them. This was their new world. They were invisible. The Kthar saw only the uniforms, not the people inside them. The story of the man who chose a girl over gold had amused the king, But down here in the lower decks, it meant nothing. They were just two more cleaners. As the hours passed, they learned the rhythm of the ship. They felt the subtle shifts in the hum of the engines. They learned to recognize the different sounds of the Kthar footsteps. The regular guards walked heavily. The engineers walked more quickly, their steps lighter. The high-ranking officers like Commander Droth were rarely seen here, but when they were, the air changed. The other cleaners would freeze, not moving until the officer was long gone. During a break, they were allowed to get nutrient paste from a dispenser. It was a bland, gray goo that tasted like nothing. They sat against a wall to eat it. This was when they saw their first opportunity. A human man was working the dispenser. He was older, with a tired face, but his eyes were careful and watchful. He saw Jean and Myri sitting together, talking quietly, and he seemed to make a decision. When he brought them their paste, he spoke in a voice so low it was almost a breath. "You are the ones from the throne room," he said. It wasn't a question. Jean and Myri looked at him, wary. They said nothing. The man gave a small, grim smile. "My name is Deho. I was a cook. Now I just serve this paste." He looked around to make sure no Kthar were near. "It was a brave thing you did, or a foolish one, but it gave people hope. To see one of us make the king look confused. It was something. Hope does not get us off this ship," Jean said quietly. Deho's smile faded. "No, it does not." He leaned a little closer. "But watching, listening, that might." He looked directly at Myri. "You see things, don't you?" "I could tell, even from across the room." Myri held his gaze and gave a single, slight nod. Deho's eyes flicked to a point over their shoulders. A guard patrol was coming. He straightened up and his voice returned to a normal, bored tone. "Eat quickly. The work shift is not over." He walked away. It was a small contact. A tiny crack in the wall of silence. But it was something. Later, while cleaning a grimy section of wall near a control panel, Myri stopped. She pointed with her chin to a series of symbols on the panel. "That symbol," she whispered. "It means environmental control. I saw it in the throne room. The code I memorized. I think it was for a system like this." Jean looked at the panel. It was sealed shut, but he could see the small keypad next to it. "Can you remember the whole code?" "I think so," she said. "But we have no reason to use it here. This just controls the air and temperature for this section." "Knowing how to control the air might be useful one day," Jean said. "But we need something bigger. We need to find the heart of the ship, the communications array, or the engine room." Their chance to learn more came sooner than they expected. A few cycles later, they were assigned to clean a maintenance bay. This was a noisy, busy area where Kthar engineers fixed broken tools and small drones. The Kthar here were focused on their work, shouting technical terms to each other. They paid no attention to the two humans scrubbing the floor in the corner. Jin's eyes were everywhere. He watched the engineers work. He saw how they used their tools. He listened to their complaints about faulty parts and system errors. He was storing it all away, like collecting pieces of a puzzle. Then he saw her. A young woman was working with the Kthar engineers. She was human, wearing a gray uniform like theirs, but she had a tool belt and was helping to calibrate a large energy cell. She moved with a quiet confidence. The Kthar engineers bossed her around, but they did not treat her with the same contempt as the other laborers. They needed her skills. Her name was Sujin. She had been a technician on Earth, and the Kthar had found her skills useful for low-level tasks. When the engineers moved to another part of the bay, Sujin stayed behind to tidy up some cables. She was close to where Jean and Myri were working. Jean took a risk. He spoke to her in a normal voice, as if asking a simple question. "The resonance dampener on that model? Is it still prone to failure?" Sujin froze for a second, then continued coiling the cable. She did not look at him. "You know about dampeners?" she asked, her voice low. "I fix things," Jean said. "I know when a system is built to fail." Sujin risked a quick glance at him. Her eyes were intelligent and cautious. "They are all built to fail eventually. The Kthar just think their things last forever." She finished with the cable and picked up another. "You are the one who chose the girl." "We chose each other," Myri said from where she was scrubbing the floor. Sujin looked at Myri, then back at Jean. A look of understanding passed between them. They were all playing a part. They were all hiding their real selves from their captors. "The main comms relay," Jean said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where is it?" Sujin's eyes widened in alarm. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "That is a death wish. It is deep in the secure zone. Heavy guards. Impossibly locked doors. But if we could get a message out," Myri whispered. Sujin was silent for a long moment. The sounds of the maintenance bay echoed around them. Then she spoke so quietly they could barely hear. "The relay is on Deck 7, behind the primary data core. The door requires a dual command code. 2 officers must approve entry. She picked up her tools. It cannot be done. She walked away quickly, not looking back. Jean and Myri went back to their scrubbing. They did not look at each other. But inside, a spark had been lit. They had a name. Daeho, the cook who controlled the food. They had a technician. Sujin, who knew the ship systems. And they had a target. The comms relay on Deck 7.it was an impossible goal. But for the first time since they were captured, it was a goal. They were no longer just cleaning the floor. They were cleaning a path forward, one slow, careful scrub at a time. They were invisible, and they were going to use that invisibility to fight back. The work continued day after day. The cycles on the ship were marked only by the dimming and brightening of the lights. Jean and Myri scrubbed floors, cleaned pipes, and wiped down walls. They were ghosts in the machine, unseen and unheard. But their minds were never still. They began to build their network, one silent contact at a time. It was like weaving a net in the dark. Daeho, the cook, was their first thread. He could not move around much, but he heard things. The Kthar guards who came for their nutrient paste sometimes talked. They complained about duties, about superiors, about boring patrol routes. Daeho listened, and he passed the information to Jean and Myri when they came for their meals, using simple code words mixed with normal talk. The special stew is ready on Deck 7. He might say, which meant there was increased guard activity there. Or, the rations are low today, meaning the guards were on edge. Sujin, the technician, was their second thread. She was too scared to help them directly, but she gave them information about the ship. She drew tiny, simple maps on scraps of cleaning cloth with a piece of charcoal, showing the air ducts and maintenance shafts that the Kthar never used. These were the secret pathways of the ship, too small for the large aliens. Jean studied these maps until he had them memorized. He saw how the ducts connected different decks. He saw a path that started near their cleaning sector and went all the way up to Deck 6, just one level below their target. But Deck 7 was the problem. It was the secure heart of the ship. The doors were stronger, the guards more alert. According to Sujin, the door to the comms relay room itself required 2 high-ranking officers to enter their codes at the same time. It was a system designed to prevent any one person from betraying them. It seemed perfect. Jean, however, saw it differently. He was a mechanic. He understood that every system has a weakness. Sometimes the weakness is not in the machine, but in the people who use it. He shared his idea with Myri one night in their cell. They sat in the dark, their voices whispers. The door needs 2 codes, Jean said. But the Kthar are proud. They are lazy. They would not want to be bothered every time they need to check their communications. There must be another way in. A maintenance panel. An emergency override. A way for their engineers to fix the door if it breaks. Myri thought about this. Sujin said the door is on the central data core wall. All the important systems are there. It would be heavily watched. But the watch has patterns, Jean said. You have seen it. The guards change at the same time. They walk the same route. For a few minutes, during the change, there is confusion. More guards. But they are talking. They are not paying full attention. Myri's eyes gleamed in the dim light. And if we could get inside the maintenance duct on Deck 6, we could be right above the data core room. We could look down. We could see this door for ourselves. That was the plan. A simple, dangerous plan. They would use the next cleaning shift near the Deck 6 duct entrance to sneak into the shafts. They would crawl to a point above the secure area on Deck 7 and observe. They needed to see the door with their own eyes. The next day, their chance came. They were assigned to clean a storage room on Deck 6. The room was cluttered and dusty, filled with unused equipment, and in the back corner, partly hidden by a broken console, was the grated cover of an air duct. Their hearts beat fast. This was it. They worked slowly, cleaning every surface, waiting for the right moment. The guard patrol passed by the open door every 20 minutes. They had a short window after each pass. After the third patrol, Jean gave a sharp nod. He moved to the duct cover. The grate was held in place by simple magnetic clamps, not even locked. The Ktharis' arrogance was their greatest weakness. They never imagined a human would be smart or brave enough to try this. Jean pulled, and the grate came away with a soft sigh. The opening was small, just big enough for them to squeeze through. The duct inside was dark and dusty. Go, Jean whispered. Myri slipped inside first, moving on her hands and knees. Jean followed, pulling the grate back into place behind him. The darkness was almost total. The air was thick with dust, and they had to fight not to cough. They moved forward, using Sujin's map as a guide in their minds. The metal duct echoed softly with their movements. They could hear the deep hum of the ship all around them, and sometimes, the muffled sound of Kthar voices from the rooms below. It was slow, frightening work. One wrong turn and they would be lost forever in the walls of the giant ship. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a wider section of the duct. Up ahead, light shone up through another grate in the floor. This was the spot Sujin had marked. It was directly above the corridor outside the main data core. They crawled to the edge of the grate and looked down. The view was perfect. They were looking down into a wide, brightly lit corridor. The walls were a clean, white metal, unlike the grimy gray of the lower decks. Two Kthar guards stood at attention before a massive, circular door. It was made of a shimmering blue metal, covered in glowing symbols. This was the door to the data core and, just beyond it, the comms relay. They watched. They saw the guard change. Just as they had predicted, for about 3 minutes, 4 guards were in the corridor instead of 2. The new guards and the old guards talked briefly, their clicks and rumbles echoing up the duct. It was a moment of lowered vigilance. Then, something happened that made Jin's breath catch. A Kthar engineer approached the door. He was carrying a diagnostic tool. He did not input a code on the main panel. Instead, he walked to the side of the large doorframe and pressed a hidden, recessed button. A small, secondary panel slid open, revealing a simple keypad. The engineer typed a quick code. A smaller, person-sized door, cleverly hidden within the larger one, hissed open just enough for him to slip inside. It closed behind him. Jin and Myri looked at each other in the dim light. Their eyes were wide with discovery. The Kthar did have a back door, a service entrance for their engineers. It did not need 2 officers. It only needed 1 code. They had found the weakness. They did not need to wait any longer. Carefully, silently, they began to crawl back the way they had come. They had what they needed. They knew where the door was. They knew about the hidden panel. Now they just needed the code. And they knew who could get it for them. They slipped back into the storage room, replaced the grate, and resumed their cleaning just minutes before the next guard patrol passed by. No one had noticed they were gone. That night, in their cell, they made a new plan. It was even more dangerous. We need that code from the hidden panel, Jin said. We cannot see it from the duct. We need to get someone down there who can. Myri nodded. Sujin. She works in that area sometimes. She could see an engineer use it. She could memorize it, like I did in the throne room. It is a huge risk to ask her, Jin said. If she is caught. We have to try, Myri said firmly. It is the only way. The next day, during their break, they found Sujin. She was alone, calibrating a power converter. They approached her slowly. Jin spoke quietly. The big door on deck 7. There is a smaller door inside it. A service door. It has its own keypad. Sujin looked shocked. How do you know that? We saw it, Myri said. We need the code for that keypad. Sujin shook her head, her face pale. No, I cannot. That is the core. They will kill me. You don't have to steal it, Jin said gently. You just have to see it. You are a technician. They let you get close. Just watch. Remember what you see. That is all. Sujin was trembling. She looked from Jin's earnest face to Myri's calm, determined one. She thought about living the rest of her life as a slave. She thought about the magma cores. Then she thought about the story of the man who chose a girl over gold. He had seen value where no one else did. He had taken a crazy risk. And he was still alive. She took a deep, shaky breath. I will try, she whispered. I cannot promise anything, but I will try to look. It was enough. It was all they could ask for. The invisible network was working. The plan, once impossible, was now just a code away from becoming real. The quiet rebellion in the ship's belly was almost ready to speak. The wait was the hardest part. Cycles passed. Jin and Myri continued their cleaning duties, their hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and fear. Every time they saw Sujin, she would give a small, almost invisible shake of her head. She had not seen the code yet, or she had not had a safe chance to look. The air on the ship began to change. The deep hum of the engines took on a different tone, a higher, strained whine. The Kthar crew became more hurried, their movements sharper. Commander Droth was seen more often in the lower decks, barking orders. Something was happening. Jin felt it through the deck plates. We are entering an ion storm, he murmured to Myri as they scrubbed a corridor. The space here is unstable. It will mess with their sensors. It will create static on their communications. Myri understood immediately. It is the perfect cover. It is our only chance, Jin corrected her. If we do not do it now, during the storm, we may never get another. That evening, as they picked up their nutrient paste, Daeho the cook leaned forward. His face was tense. The stew is very hot today, he whispered, using their code for high alert. The officers are nervous. The storm is a bad one. They are all on the bridge. This was it. The officers were distracted. The ship was shaking slightly from the turbulence outside. The constant lights flickered for a second as they walked back to their cleaning area. They saw Sujin. She was waiting for them near a tool locker. Her hands were shaking. She did not speak. She simply looked at Myri and, with her finger, subtly traced 4 shapes on the side of her leg. A circle, a square, a triangle, and another circle. Then she turned and hurried away. Myri's mind, trained for this very thing, captured the image. She knew it was not the shapes, but the buttons they represented on the keypad. She nodded to Jean. They had the code. Their plan was simple and desperate. They would go now. They would use the chaos of the storm. They slipped away from their assigned area and moved quickly to the storage room on Deck 6. The guard patrols were less frequent. The Kthar focused on keeping the massive ship stable. They reached the room unseen. In moments, they had the grate off and were crawling back into the dark, dusty duct. The ship shuddered around them, a great metal beast in pain. The duct vibrated, the metal groaning. It was terrifying, but it also covered any sound they made. They moved faster this time, knowing the way. They reached the grate above the secure corridor on Deck 7 and looked down. The 2 guards were still there, but they were uneasy. They were looking at the ceiling, feeling the same shudders. Their attention was not on the door. Jean and Myri waited. They needed the guard change. It was their moment of maximum confusion. The ship gave a violent lurch. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Alarms blared somewhere in the distance. In the chaos, the new guards arrived for their shift. The 4 Kthar were talking loudly, their clicks and rumbles agitated. This was it. While the guards were distracted, Jean pushed the duct grate open. It was a risk, but the noise of the storm and the alarms covered the soft sound. He dropped down first, landing softly on the clean white floor. He turned and helped Myri down. They pressed themselves against the wall, in the shadow of a large console. The guards were only 10 meters away, but they were facing each other, arguing about the storm. Jean and Myri moved like ghosts along the wall, towards the huge circular door. There it was, the shimmering blue metal. Jean ran his fingers along the side of the doorframe, feeling for the hidden button. He found it, a small, recessed circle. He pressed it. The small panel slid open silently, revealing the keypad. He looked at Myri. She nodded, her face pale but determined. She leaned forward and pressed the sequence. Circle, square, triangle, circle. A green light flashed. With a soft hiss, the small, person-sized door within the larger one slid open. They slipped inside. The door closed behind them, sealing them in. They were in a small, dark antechamber. In front of them was another door, this one transparent. Through it, they could see a room pulsing with light. Towers of blinking consoles and racks of spinning data drives hummed with energy. And in the center of it all was a single, isolated console with a large main screen. This was the central comms relay. Jean went to the transparent door. It was locked. There was no hidden panel here. This was a simple electronic lock. "Can you open it?" Myri asked, her voice tight. Jean looked at the mechanism. It was a magnetic seal. He pulled the sonic wrench he had stolen from the maintenance bay days ago from his pocket. It was a crude tool, but it was all he had. He pressed it against the door's control housing and activated it. The wrench buzzed, and the door's electronics sparked. With a clunk, the magnetic lock disengaged, and the door slid open. They were in. Jean went straight to the main console. The symbols were alien, but the layout was universal. Power, transmission, frequency. His mechanic's mind understood the flow. "What do we send?" he asked, his fingers hovering over the controls. Myri stood beside him, her eyes scanning the screen. "Everything," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Send them everything. The ship schematics from the public database. Our current location from the NAV console. And the cargo manifest. The one that lists all of us. Every human life on this ship. Mark it with the old Guangzhou emergency beacon frequency. Let Earth know we are here. Let everyone know." Jin's fingers flew. He found the data files. He found the transmitter controls. He set the frequency to the old, familiar emergency channel of their home. He compiled it all into one massive, unencrypted data packet. He took a deep breath and pressed the transmit button. A bar on the screen filled with light. A low, powerful hum filled the room. They had done it. A scream into the void. A cry for help from the belly of the beast. Suddenly, blaring red lights and a deafening siren erupted within the room. They had triggered an internal alarm. The main door to the comms room, the big one, began to open. They were trapped. Jean and Myri turned, standing back to back as the door slid fully open. Kthar guards poured in, their weapons raised. But it was not just guards. King Vexus himself stood in the doorway, his form radiating a fury so intense the air around him seemed to crackle. The orange lights on his shell flashed like lightning. You insects!" he roared, his translated voice shaking with rage. "You dare to touch the heart of my ship. I will tear you apart with my own hands." He took a step forward, his claws extended. Jean and Myri stood their ground. There was nowhere to run. But before the king could take another step, the entire ship shuddered violently, far worse than before. It was not the storm. This was different. A new, urgent alarm sounded. Commander Droth rushed into the room, his faceplates shifting with panic. He did not even look at the humans. "Sire!" Droth cried out, his voice tight with a fear they had never heard before. "We are being hailed. Multiple hails. It is the Terran Defense Fleet. They are here. They have surrounded us." King Vexus froze. His multifaceted eyes shifted from his commander to the two humans standing defiantly by the console. He looked at Jean, the unexceptional mechanic. He looked at Myri, the worthless girl. He saw the transmitted data packet still glowing on the screen. In that moment, he finally understood. The gold had been a test of greed, which he understood. But the real test had been a test of value, which he had failed. He had granted a man a piece of treasure, and that man had chosen a partner, a mind, a spark of hope. That single, illogical human choice had seen a flaw in his perfect system, built a silent army in his ship's belly, and found a weakness in his most secure door. The two worthless humans had not just sent a message. They had called down the wrath of all humanity. Jean looked at Myri. The hard, cold fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, bright hope. He did not smile, but his eyes held hers, and in that look was everything they had been through. Outside the ship, through the viewports, they could see the sleek, powerful shapes of human warships dropping out of light speed, their weapons glowing in the dark of space. They had been heard. The silence on the Cthar ship was broken, not by the hum of engines or the click of claws, but by the sound of hope, returning at last.